Hello, and today, well, it's still the same day, but we're going to be doing feudalism. We're going to be covering it basically, and some of the places it is used, how it is used, and why it is a upgrade from governments like an absolute monarchy, a despotism, or in some cases, maybe even a republic. Not mainly though. Um, 1 minute. So let's start this out. So, a feudalism is a government where you have uh, where it's a siege government between who's the highest ranking in society and who's the lowest ranking. Now, this is defined on whereabouts in society you are, like your job or what your class is. Now, this is used everywhere from Japan to Europe. It is a government that was used worldwide, but is no longer commonly used in modern times because it's not as useful and it's not very friendly on the people. So, right at the bottom of a feudalistic society, you've got serfs. Now, serfs are like peasants, except they don't get paid, they don't pay taxes, they're just owned by their lord. And right above serfs are peasants. They are right above them. They pay taxes. They get paid by the lord, but the taxes are often more than they get paid. So it's a bit iffy. And they essentially pay the lord to live there. They pay the lord rent, and then the lord pays them to work on their land. It's that constant cycle. And then just above the serfs, you have the lower class merchants. Now, these are people who would often live in cities, like just they'd often live in cities, unlike a lot of people. They would have a certain trade that they were good at. Well, actually, yeah, they'd have a certain trade which they're good at. They would often sell the products they make, or they would go from place to place. The ones that sell the products they make are well, they are slightly higher than the other merchants, and they're called artisans. And then just above them, you have, your noblemen, your patricians. They the richer people who often ruled over not really anything. Sometimes a few villages, but it was often the richer people, not always the united people. Then above that, you had the knights. Like just above that, you had the knights or the lords. It's the same thing, who would rule over castles and lots of lands around them, acres and acres of land. Then above that, you had the direct royal family, like princes and that. Then you had the king or queen, whatever's in charge at the time. And depending on what feudalism it is, either underneath the royal family or above the king, which if it's above the king, it's technically a theocracy, but the priests and the bishops and that, sometimes they'll be above the king, sometimes below. Like in the Church of England, the king is the leader of the church there, and the priests and the holy class are underneath that. But in another government, say in feudal France, the priests and that were above, as it was a Catholicism, and the priests were direct word Pope. So here's why I think it works better than a direct monarchy, an absolute monarchy, and a despotism. I personally think it's better because in a republic you've got a better system, and overall, because of the way the lord system works, you would be able to have and fund an easier to draft, conscript, and build up a larger army, which is why it is more useful in feudalistic times, because there was a lot of war, like in feudal Japan, when you had the daimyo ruling underneath the shogun, they needed to have lots and lots of people. And their system was a bit different, with merchants being right at the bottom as they were believed to rip off other people's work essentially. Then you had the farmers and the fishermen, and then you had the ronin, which were samurai with no masters. Then you had the samurai, or, well, in translation, servants or slaves, or, well, samurai in this case also means warrior, so bushi. And then above them you have the daimyo or lords, and then you would have the shogun, and then right at the end of the war, well, of feudal Japan, you had the emperor, like Tokugawa Ieyasu or Toyotomi Hideyoshi. They were two which could be considered emperor. Maybe Oda Nobunaga, I'm not sure about that one though. And then it works better than a monarchy because, once again, ruling over an entire piece of land, running over an entire country by yourself, a big country, is almost impossible. It's why there were 13 pharaoh dynasties in Egypt, because they could not control over the land. Because what would happen is it would start just at the Nile like this, then it would go up like that, and then get bigger at that, bigger down below, or getting bigger up at the top. And then it was so big they just couldn't control it all, so then it collapsed right back into the middle. Next dynasty. And it just did like that for hundreds and hundreds of years until the country eventually fell. And the golden age of Egypt ended in like 700 BC, where that was when the first dynasty fell, and it was like this, like getting on like that, and they'd conquered like quite a lot down the Nile, which would essentially be like this quite a bit, and then it would get smaller and smaller. But for them it was like that. They had quite a few cities, but a lot of it was kept very narrow to the Nile. And then it just collapses because they just can't control over the entire land. And then in some ways I think it's better than a republic, because, like I said in my republic video, if you lose a lord in feudalism, you can just replace him. It's easy. You've just lost a fighter who probably died in battle gaining you something, and they're just easy replacement. Maybe you do lose a little bit, but it won't affect the entire system. In a republic, if you lose a city or a representative before the next election, it completely breaks down the system, as there's a lack of, like, there could be an issue with voting, an issue with somebody's job then can't be done, and you can't just bring someone up because then you need to vote again, and you can't vote until the time's gone out. In my classical republic video, sorry. You can't just do it like that. And also the fact that in feudalism it's very hard to go between classes. If you're in the merchant class, it's going to be very hard for you to get to nobleman, but not as hard as it would be for a peasant to become a merchant or a serf to get actually freed. It just doesn't happen. Or it's quite unlikely that you'll go down as well. If you're a lord, you could have your lands took off you if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, but that was very rare, and it would likely be all your land, as they'd still want you as a lord because you'd still be very useful to them, and you'd just be very useful to them, and it'd be a big disappointment for them if you had all your land gone. It would be a lord gone, and they will often spend a lot of their time training and doing lots of things like taxes for their people, like changing taxes, changing laws, and just overall helping the king out in his deeds. I think that wraps it up for this video. Thank you for watching.